The wheelchair rattled across the wooden platform, and Caleb Boone's world stopped turning. He'd sent for a wife, strong, capable, ready for ranch life. Instead, destiny rolled toward him in polished wood and iron wheels, carrying a woman whose spine was straighter than most men standing. The crowd held its breath. His twins stared. And somewhere between his clenched jaw and her unflinching gaze, the entire town of Silver Butte, Montana waited to see if this war-scarred rancher would walk away, or stay and face the woman who couldn't walk at all. This is the story of two broken souls who learned that love doesn't need legs to stand on. Stay with me until the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The spring wind carried promises it couldn't keep across the Montana Territory in 1879. It whispered through sagebrush and stirred the dust on Silver Butte Station's platform, where destinies were made and unmade with every arriving train. Caleb Boone stood at the edge of that platform, his broad shoulders casting shadows in the late afternoon sun, his calloused hands gripping his hat like it might escape if he loosened his hold. 43 years old, weathered by war and widowhood, Caleb had learned that hope was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. But desperation, now that was something he understood intimately. It lived in the morning struggle to braid his daughter's hair, in the burned suppers his son tried to salvage without complaint, in the silence that filled his house like an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. The advertisement had seemed straightforward when he'd placed it 3 months ago. Rancher seeks practical woman for marriage. Must be hardy, capable with children, willing to work. Remote location. Honest replies only. He'd received 17 responses. Most were flowery, full of romantic notions that would wilt under Montana's harsh sun faster than hothouse roses. But one letter had been different. Plain-spoken, intelligent, with just enough warmth to suggest a beating heart beneath practical words. Clara Emerson, she'd signed it. A schoolteacher from Philadelphia, orphaned, seeking a fresh start where her past couldn't follow. They'd exchanged 3 more letters. Hers were always careful, measured, revealing just enough to seem honest while keeping her true self at a careful distance. He'd noticed that, of course. Caleb wasn't a man who missed details, but he'd attributed it to appropriate caution, the kind any sensible woman would exercise when corresponding with a stranger who'd become her husband. He hadn't asked for a photograph. That surprised some folks, but Caleb had his reasons. Beautiful women had always made him stupid. His first wife had proven that with devastating clarity. This time he wanted someone real, someone who could stand beside him not because of pretty words or prettier faces, but because life demanded it, and she was strong enough to answer. "Papa, is she going to be beautiful?" His daughter Sarah's voice pulled him from his thoughts. At 7 years old, she had her mother's dark curls and a heart too tender for the hard life they lived. "Beauty's not what matters, little bird," Caleb said, though his stomach was twisted tighter than a bronc rider's grip. "But is she going to be nice?" This from Samuel, Sarah's twin by 3 minutes, and her opposite in every way that mattered. Where she was soft, he was all sharp edges and suspicion, especially of anyone who might try to replace the mother he barely remembered. "We'll find out soon enough," Caleb answered, which was as close to honest as he could manage while his own doubts were eating him alive. The train's whistle cut through the afternoon like a knife through flesh, and Caleb felt every muscle in his body go rigid. This was it. The moment that would determine whether he'd made the biggest mistake of his life or the smartest decision since mustering out of the army. The locomotive rolled in trailing smoke and cinders, a massive iron beast that connected their small corner of Montana to the rest of the world, for better or worse. Caleb watched passengers begin to disembark. A cattle buyer he recognized, 2 miners heading for the hills, an older woman who was immediately swept up by waiting family. But no Clara Emerson. His jaw tightened. Had she taken one look at Silver Butte from the train window and decided to stay aboard? He couldn't blame her if she had. The town wasn't much to speak of. 24 buildings scattered along a dusty main street, most of them false-fronted and optimistic. The surrounding ranch land was beautiful, if you had eyes for that sort of thing, but harsh, unforgiving to those who couldn't adapt. "Papa, look!" Sarah's small hand grabbed his shirt sleeve, pulling with surprising strength. That's when he saw her. Or rather, he saw the wheelchair first, polished wood frame with iron wheels, rattling slightly as the porter maneuvered it across the junction between train car and platform. And sitting in that chair, straight-backed and proud as a queen on her throne, was a woman who could only be his mail-order bride. The platform went silent. Not the natural quiet that sometimes fell between moments, but the heavy-weighted silence of collective shock. Caleb felt it press against him like a physical force as every eye on that platform turned to watch. Eveline Dorset, though he didn't know her real name yet, wore a traveling dress of deep green that had seen better days but was clean and carefully mended. Her chestnut hair was pinned in a neat bun beneath a simple straw hat, and her face, while not classically beautiful, held something that made Caleb's breath catch despite himself. Intelligence, perhaps. Or maybe it was the absolute absence of apology in her expression as she surveyed the gathered crowd. She didn't cry, didn't plead, didn't offer excuses or explanations, just sat there with her hands folded calmly in her lap while the porter positioned her chair, her chin lifted at an angle that dared anyone to pity her. Caleb's mind went blank, completely, utterly blank. This couldn't be Clara Emerson. Clara Emerson was supposed to be capable, hardy, ready to work a ranch. Clara Emerson was supposed to... "Which one of you gentlemen is Caleb Boone?" Her voice carried clearly across the platform, cultured but not affected, with an underlying strength that suggested steel wrapped in velvet. Caleb's feet stayed rooted to the planks beneath them. Around him, he felt the town's attention shift, waiting to see what he would do. Some faces showed pity. For him or her, he couldn't tell. Others showed barely concealed satisfaction, the kind that came from watching someone else's troubles unfold like entertainment. "That's my papa!" Sarah's voice rang out clear and true before Caleb could stop her. His daughter had already slipped her hand from his and was running toward the wheelchair with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Sarah, wait." But she was already there, standing directly in front of the strange woman, her head tilted at that particular angle she got when something puzzled her. "Why are you sitting like that?" Sarah asked with the brutal honesty that only children could manage. "Did you hurt your leg?" Caleb finally found his feet, moving forward to pull his daughter back and apologize. But the woman in the wheelchair spoke first. "Because," she said, leaning forward with a conspiratorial smile that transformed her entire face, "my horse just doesn't need feeding." The silence broke into surprised laughter, small at first, then growing as people caught the joke. Even Caleb felt the corner of his mouth twitch, despite the chaos spinning through his thoughts. "You have an invisible horse?" Sarah's eyes went wide with wonder. "The very best kind," the woman assured her. "Never throws a shoe, never bucks, and I've never once had to shovel anything it left behind." More laughter rippled through the crowd, but Caleb barely heard it. He was too busy trying to reconcile the woman before him with the careful, measured letters he'd received. This woman wasn't careful. She was bold, meeting the town's shock head-on with humor instead of shame. He made himself approach, made his legs carry him forward until he stood beside his daughter, looking down at the woman who'd traveled 1,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met. Up close, her eyes were gray. Not the soft, gentle gray of a cloudy sky, but the sharp, clear gray of winter ice. They met his directly, unflinching, and he saw intelligence there, and wariness, and something else he couldn't quite name, a kind of desperate hope that had been buried so deep it barely showed. "Mr. Boone," she said, and her voice was steady despite the white-knuckled grip she maintained on the arms of her wheelchair. "I'm Clara Emerson. I believe we've corresponded." The lie sat between them like a third presence, because whatever else this woman might be, Caleb was suddenly certain she wasn't Clara Emerson. Or if she was, she'd left out rather significant details in her letters. "Ma'am," his voice came out rougher than intended. "We should talk. Privately." Something flickered across her face. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. But she simply nodded and said, "Of course. Though I should mention that I've traveled for 6 days straight and would very much appreciate that conversation happening somewhere I might have access to water and a necessary room." It was such a practical, matter-of-fact statement that it caught him off guard. She wasn't begging or making excuses. She was simply stating needs that any human being would have after nearly a week on trains. "The hotel's 2 buildings down," Caleb heard himself say. "We can talk there while the children—" "I want to come," Sarah interrupted, her hand already reaching for the woman's chair. Can I push? I'm very strong. Samuel says I'm strong as a mule, but meaner. Sarah Grace Boone, Caleb started, mortified. But the woman laughed, a real laugh that seemed to surprise her as much as anyone else. Strong as a mule and meaner sounds exactly like what I need. What's your name, fierce one? Sarah. And that's Samuel hiding behind Papa like a scared rabbit. I am not. Samuel emerged from behind Caleb's leg, his face flushed with indignation. I'm not scared of anything. Good, the woman said seriously, because I'm going to need brave children if I'm to survive Montana. I've heard there are bears here, and wolves, possibly dragons, though my sources on that are unreliable. There aren't any dragons, Samuel said, but his suspicion had given way to reluctant interest. Are you certain? Because I packed dragon-deterrent herbs just in case. What kind of herbs? Samuel edged closer despite himself. That's a secret I only share with brave children who aren't scared of anything, she said with a perfectly straight face. Caleb watched his son step fully out from behind him, watched the way this strange woman looked at Samuel, not with the forced sweetness some folks used on children, but with genuine respect, as if he were a person whose opinions mattered. The hotel, Caleb repeated, his voice harder than he intended. Now. The command was for himself as much as anyone else. He needed space to think, needed to understand what exactly he was dealing with before the entire town witnessed whatever came next. The porter had disappeared, probably eager to distance himself from the awkward situation unfolding on the platform. Caleb found himself moving behind the wheelchair, his hands gripping the handles without conscious thought. I can manage myself, the woman said quickly. I don't need... The boardwalk's uneven, Caleb interrupted. And there's a step up to the hotel. Unless you'd rather I left you sitting in the street? Their eyes met in the reflection of the general store's window, and he saw her jaw tighten with frustration. But she nodded once, sharply, and placed her hands back in her lap. Pushing a wheelchair turned out to be more complicated than Caleb had anticipated. The wheels caught on every crack and divot in the boardwalk, and twice he had to lift the front to get over particularly rough patches. Each time, he felt her stiffen with what he assumed was embarrassment or anger. The walk to the hotel took less than 3 minutes but felt like hours. Every person they passed stopped to stare. Some pretended to be doing something else, examining store windows, adjusting saddles, but their eyes followed the strange procession. Caleb heard whispers starting before they'd even reached the hotel steps. Is that Boone's mail-order bride? In a wheelchair, can you imagine? Poor man. What's he supposed to do with that? Caleb felt heat rise up his neck, but when he glanced down, the woman's expression remained serene, almost distant, as if she'd learned to hear without listening, to let words slide past without landing. Sarah and Samuel had gone strangely quiet, walking one on each side of the wheelchair like small honor guards. When they reached the hotel steps, Caleb said, "Kids, wait here." "But Papa," Sarah started. "Here," he repeated in the voice that meant no arguments. The hotel clerk's eyes widened when Caleb carried the woman, wheelchair and all, up the 3 steps into the lobby. It wasn't graceful, and her hands clutched the chair arms so tightly he thought she might leave dents, but they managed. "I need a room," Caleb told the clerk, a narrow-faced man named Peterson who loved gossip more than his own wife. "Private, just for conversation." Peterson's eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. "Now, Caleb, I don't know what kind of establishment you think I run." "A room, Peterson, with a door that closes. Unless you want me to have this conversation right here in your lobby where every Tom, Dick, and Harry can hear." The clerk's curiosity warred with his sense of propriety. Propriety won, barely. "Room 3, end of the hall. Don't expect me to carry that contraption up the stairs." "Ground floor," Caleb said flatly. "All taken." "Then untake one." They stared at each other until Peterson huffed and produced a key. "Fine, but this better not reflect poorly on my establishment's reputation." The room was small and plainly furnished. A bed, a washstand, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out onto the alley. Caleb positioned the wheelchair facing the window, giving her a view of something other than him, then stood with his back against the door. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, the woman said, "I understand if you want to send me back. The train returns east tomorrow morning. I have enough money for passage. Do you? It wasn't a question. Yes. Her voice remained steady, but he saw her fingers trembling slightly before she clasped them together. I'm not here to trap you, Mr. Boone. I know I'm not what you expected. I know I'm not what you need. And what do I need, Miss Emerson? He put slight emphasis on the name, testing it. Her shoulders stiffened. Someone who can work. Someone who can help on your ranch with your children. Someone who isn't... She gestured vaguely at the wheelchair. This. You lied. Still not a question, but he wanted to hear her admit it. I omitted. Her chin lifted again in that gesture he was beginning to recognize as pure defiance. There's a difference. Not much of one from where I'm standing. No, I suppose there isn't. She turned the wheelchair, the movement practiced, efficient, to face him directly. I told you in my letters that I was a teacher. That's true. I told you I was orphaned. Also true. I told you I wanted a fresh start. Perhaps the truest thing of all. You forgot to mention you can't walk. I didn't forget. Her gray eyes met his without flinching. I deliberately chose not to tell you because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. You'd have thrown my letter away without reading another word, just like the 12 other men I wrote to before you. Caleb felt something twist in his chest. Anger, certainly, but also an uncomfortable recognition. She was right. He would have discarded her letter immediately. He'd wanted practical, capable, strong. A woman in a wheelchair was none of those things. Was she? What happened to you? He asked before he could stop himself. Her expression went carefully blank. Does it matter? To this conversation? Yeah, I'd say it does. She studied him for a long moment as if trying to decide how much truth he could handle. Finally, she said, I was 17. There was a fire. I got out. My legs didn't. The explanation was too simple, too practiced. Caleb had told enough lies during the war to recognize one when he heard it, but he let it pass for now. And you thought coming here, lying about who you are, marrying a stranger, that was a good plan? No, she said quietly. I thought it was my only plan. Do you have any idea what options are available to a woman like me, Mr. Boone? I can't work in a factory. The foreman won't hire me. I can't teach in most schools. The boards think I'm a distraction or an inspiration, neither of which is helpful. I can't even keep house for wages because no one trusts a cripple not to burn their supper or drop their babies. The word cripple came out harsh, angry, as if she were trying to hurt herself with it before he could. I'm educated, she continued, her voice rising slightly. I'm intelligent. I'm capable with children, good with numbers, can read Latin and French and enough Greek to translate Homer. I can cook, clean, mend, keep accounts. I can do everything any other woman can do. I just do it from a chair instead of standing. But none of that matters because people see this, she slapped the wheelchair arm, and decide I'm broken, useless, pitiable. She stopped abruptly, as if surprised by her own outburst. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled once more. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. You have every right to be angry. You have every right to send me back. Just, please don't make me go today. Let me rest. Let me gather myself. Tomorrow, I'll take the train east, and you'll never hear from me again. Caleb found himself studying her, really studying her for the first time. She was younger than he'd expected, probably not yet 30. Her hands, he noticed, were callous despite their refinement. Workers' hands. Her dress was carefully maintained but showed signs of repeated mending. Pride in poverty, his mother would have called it. And her eyes. God. Those eyes held worlds of pain that had been carefully filed down into something manageable, something that could be carried without breaking. The children liked you, he heard himself say. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. They're lovely children. You should be proud. I am. They're also a handful and a half. Sarah talks to everyone and everything, including the chickens. Samuel doesn't trust anyone farther than he can spit. They drove off the last 3 housekeepers I hired. I'm not surprised. A small smile touched her lips. Sarah has the makings of a storyteller, and Samuel needs someone who'll see past his armor to the scared little boy underneath. The assessment was so accurate it made Caleb's chest tight. You got all that from 5 minutes on a train platform? I was a teacher, remember? You learn to read children quickly, or you lose control of the classroom. She paused, then added softly, and I recognize armor when I see it. I wear my own. Outside, Caleb could hear the sounds of Silver Butte going about its business. Horses in the street, someone hammering at the smithy, a woman calling for her child. Normal sounds of a normal day, while inside this room, his entire future was being rewritten. The smart thing would be to send her back, cut his losses, place another advertisement, try again. He'd look like a fool for a while, but folks would forget eventually. They always did. But something in him rebelled against that solution. Maybe it was the way she'd made Sarah laugh. Maybe it was how she'd seen straight through Samuel's defenses. Maybe it was just stubborn pride. He'd made a commitment, even if it was based on incomplete information, and Caleb Boone didn't go back on his word. Or maybe, whispered a voice in his head that sounded uncomfortably like his late wife, it was because this woman reminded him of himself, broken, hiding it, trying desperately to be more than what the world said he was. I have a proposal, he said finally. Her eyes widened slightly. I thought, a different proposal. A trial period. 1 month. You come to the ranch, help with the children, keep house as much as you're able. At the end of the month, if it's not working, for either of us, you take that train east with a paid ticket and $50 for your trouble. And if it is working, her voice was barely above a whisper, then we see about making this arrangement more permanent. You'd marry me? The disbelief in her voice cut deeper than any insult could have. Knowing about the chair? I'd marry someone who can handle my children and doesn't burst into tears the first time Samuel tells her he wishes she'd died instead of his mother. When she flinched, he added, he said that to the last housekeeper. She was gone within the hour. And you think I can handle that? But there was a spark in her eyes now, something that looked almost like hope. You handled a platform full of gawkers without flinching. You made my daughter laugh and got my son to come out of hiding. And you speak Latin, which is more education than anyone else in a 50-mile radius. He shrugged. Figure that's a better foundation than most marriages start with. She sat very still, and he could almost see her mind working through the offer, examining it from every angle for traps and pitfalls. Smart woman. No promises, she said finally. No expectations beyond room, board, and fair treatment. At the end of the month, we both have the right to walk away. She stopped, laughed bitterly. Poor choice of words. We both have the right to end the arrangement without guilt or obligation. Agreed. And I need you to understand something, Mr. Boone. Her voice went hard, almost fierce. I cannot do everything a normal wife would do. I can't work in a garden that requires me to kneel. I can't hang wash if the line is too high. I can't chase after children if they run from me. There will be things I simply cannot do, no matter how much I might want to. Can you cook? Yes. Keep accounts? Yes. Teach children their letters and numbers? Of course. Read books in that fancy Latin? She almost smiled. When the occasion calls for it. Then that's what I need. The rest we'll figure out as we go. He moved toward the door, then paused. But understand something yourself, Miss Emerson. I don't tolerate lying. You want to keep secrets about your past? Fine. But from now on, what you tell me better be truth. Fair enough, she said quietly. Though you should know, my name isn't Clara Emerson. Caleb's hand froze on the doorknob. Come again? Clara Emerson was my sister. She died 3 years ago. I took her name because she looked away, her jaw working, because mine felt poisoned. I wanted someone to meet me, really meet me, before the chair, before the name, before all the things that make people decide who I am without knowing me. For a long moment, Caleb just stared at her. Then he said, And your real name is? Evelyn. It came out like a confession. Evelyn Dorset. The name meant nothing to him, which seemed to surprise her. Should I know it? In Pennsylvania, yes. Here? She shook her head slowly. Apparently not. Perhaps that's why I came so far. There were a dozen more questions Caleb wanted to ask, but the exhaustion was written plain on her face now, the long journey and the emotional confrontation finally catching up with her. Stay here tonight, he said instead. Rest. Tomorrow morning, if you still want to try this, I'll come get you at 8. Ranch is about 5 miles out. The ride's rough, so be prepared. I'm always prepared for rough, Mr. Boone. The words held layers of meaning he wasn't ready to unpack. That's how I've survived this long. He nodded and left before he could change his mind or say something stupid. In the hallway, he sagged against the wall and let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. What the hell had he just done? Sarah and Samuel were waiting in the lobby, sitting on the worn sofa with their legs swinging. They jumped up when they saw him. Is she staying? Sarah asked immediately. Is she leaving? Samuel countered at the same time. Neither. Both. Caleb scrubbed a hand over his face. She's staying at the hotel tonight. Tomorrow. We'll see about tomorrow. But is she going to be our mother? Sarah pressed. Maybe. That's what we're going to find out. Samuel's expression went stony. We don't need a new mother. No, Caleb agreed quietly. We don't need one, but we might want one. There's a difference. They walked home as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch house sat alone at the end of a long dirt road, a sturdy 2-story structure that Caleb had built with his own hands after the war. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, like everything else in his life, built to endure rather than impress. Inside, the silence felt oppressive. Caleb stood in the kitchen, staring at the cold stove, trying to remember what he'd planned for supper. His mind kept circling back to that hotel room, to gray eyes that held too much pain and too much pride. Evelyn Dorset, not Clara Emerson. Evelyn Dorset, who'd stolen her dead sister's name to escape something in Pennsylvania, who'd traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger because it was the only option left to her, who sat in a wheelchair but carried herself like royalty. Papa? Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts. Are you going to cook, or should I get the bread and cheese? He looked at his daughter, 7 years old and already worried about feeding herself and her brother. Too much responsibility for such small shoulders. I'll cook, he said. You two go wash up. But his hands were clumsy on the pots and pans, his mind elsewhere. He burned the beans, and the biscuits came out hard as rocks. The children ate without complaint, long accustomed to his failures in the kitchen. After supper, as he tucked Sarah into bed, she asked, Does her chair have a name? What? The lady's chair, does it have a name, like how Samuel named his stick horse Thunder? Caleb found himself smiling despite everything. I don't know, little bird. Maybe you can ask her tomorrow. I'm going to call it Chariot, Sarah decided. Like in the Bible stories, chariots carried important people. She might like that. In his own room later, Caleb stood at the window and looked out across his land, thousands of acres of Montana territory that he'd fought and bled to claim. It was beautiful in its harsh way, but lonely. God, so lonely. He thought about Evelyn Dorset, sitting in that hotel room, probably unable to sleep, probably questioning her choice to come here, to trust a stranger with her future. Join the club, lady, he thought. We're all questioning our choices tonight. But even as doubt gnawed at him, another part of his mind was already planning. The doorways would need to be checked. Were they wide enough for her chair? The kitchen was all wrong, everything too high. He'd need to lower some shelves, maybe build a table at a different height. The bedroom downstairs could work if he moved the furniture around, gave her space to maneuver. He caught himself mid-thought and almost laughed. Here he was, planning renovations for a woman who might not even come to the ranch tomorrow, who might take one look at the rough road and decide she'd rather face Pennsylvania than this. Sleep came hard and left early. By dawn, Caleb was already at the barn, hitching the wagon. He'd lined it with extra blankets and pillows, trying to make it as comfortable as possible. The road to town was rough. He knew every rut and rock, but there was no helping that. Sarah and Samuel tumbled out of the house still in their nightclothes, drawn by the noise. You're going to get her, Sarah crowed. If she still wants to come, Caleb cautioned. She will, Sarah said with absolute certainty. She promised to tell me about the dragon herbs, remember? At 7:55, Caleb pulled the wagon up in front of the Silver Butte Hotel. His heart was beating faster than it should, his palms actually sweating despite the cool morning air. At 8 o'clock exactly, Evelyn appeared on the hotel porch. She'd changed into a simpler dress, practical calico in a faded blue, and her hair was braided and pinned in a style that looked like it could withstand a windstorm. The wheelchair moved smoothly as she maneuvered down a ramp that Peterson must have grudgingly provided. Caleb climbed down from the wagon, suddenly uncertain. "Morning." "Good morning, Mr. Boone." Her voice was steady, but he could see tension in the set of her shoulders. "I've decided to accept your proposal, if the offer still stands." "It stands." He moved toward her, then hesitated. "I'll need to lift you into the wagon. The chair, too." He saw her throat work as she swallowed. "I understand. Tell me if I'm hurting you." "You won't." But her hands gripped the chair arms as he approached. Caleb had carried wounded men during the war, had dragged friends from battlefields, lifted dying soldiers into ambulances. But somehow, lifting Eveline Dorset felt more intimate, more vulnerable than any of that. She was lighter than he'd expected, her body tense in his arms as he carried her to the wagon and settled her on the padded bench. Then he went back for the chair. It was heavier than it looked, the iron wheels and wooden frame solidly built. He wrestled it into the wagon bed and secured it with rope so it wouldn't slide during the journey. When he climbed up beside her, she was staring straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine," she said too quickly. "Shall we go?" The ride was every bit as rough as he'd warned. The wagon jolted over every stone, threw them against each other on the turns. Caleb tried to steer around the worst of it, but there was only so much avoiding a man could do. Beside him, Eveline stayed silent, but he could see her jaw clenching with each harsh bump. Once, a particularly vicious rut nearly threw her from the seat. His arm shot out instinctively, steadying her. "Sorry," he muttered. "It's not your fault the road is terrible." Her voice was tight but controlled. "Could have had it graded, I suppose. Never got around to it." "Were you expecting a mail-order bride in a wheelchair?" The sharp humor caught him off guard, and he almost laughed. "Can't say that I was." "Then I absolve you of poor road planning." They fell silent again, but it was a slightly easier silence now. Around them, Montana spread out in all its spring glory. New grass pushing up through winter-brown earth, wildflowers dotting the hillsides, mountains rising sharp and blue in the distance. The air smelled of sage and pine, and something indefinable that meant home. "It's beautiful," Eveline said softly, and he realized she was staring at the landscape with something like wonder. "The letters didn't prepare me for how big everything is. How empty." "Empty doesn't bother you?" Empty sounds peaceful after Philadelphia. There was a story there, but before he could ask, they crested the final rise and his ranch spread out below them. The house, the barn, the corrals. It wasn't much, but it was his. And for the next month, if they could both survive it, it would be hers too. The wagon wheels crunched to a halt in front of the ranch house, and Eveline felt her breath catch in her throat. The building stood solid against the Montana sky, weathered but well-maintained with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Smoke curled from the chimney, and chickens pecked in the yard with the indifference of creatures who knew they owned the place. Before Caleb could even set the brake, the front door burst open and Sarah came flying out, her nightdress replaced by a calico dress that matched Eveline's almost exactly. Samuel followed more slowly, hanging back near the porch rail with his arms crossed over his thin chest. "You came. You really came." Sarah reached the wagon, bouncing on her toes with excitement that made Eveline's heart clench unexpectedly. "I did promise to tell you about the dragon herbs," Eveline said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded when her insides were twisted with nervousness. Caleb climbed down without a word and moved to the back of the wagon for her chair. Eveline watched him wrestle it down, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way his shoulders strained against his shirt. He was a strong man, built for hard work and harder living. She wondered what he'd looked like before war and loss had carved lines into his face. When he came for her, she forced herself to relax. This would be her life now, at least for a month, depending on the strength and goodwill of a man she barely knew. The thought made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. His arms slid beneath her knees and back, and she held her breath as he lifted her. For just a moment, she was pressed against his chest, could feel the steady thud of his heartbeat through the fabric of his shirt. Then he was settling her into the chair, his movements careful, almost reverent. "Thank you," she murmured. He just nodded and stepped back, his jaw tight. Sarah immediately claimed a position beside the wheelchair, one small hand resting on the arm like she was staking ownership. "Can I show you everything? Can I show you my room and the chickens and the barn cats and the creek and—" "Sarah Grace, let the woman catch her breath," Caleb interrupted, but his tone was gentler than his words. "She just rode 5 miles on the worst road in Montana." "Second worst," Samuel said from the porch, speaking for the first time since Evelyn had arrived. "The road to the McCready place is worse." "Fair point," Caleb conceded. He looked at Evelyn. "House tour first, I figure. Then we can work out sleeping arrangements and such." Sleeping arrangements. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks and was grateful when Sarah's chatter covered the awkward moment. "We have 3 bedrooms upstairs and one down here that used to be Papa's office, but he doesn't use it much anymore because mostly he just falls asleep at the kitchen table with his account books anyway." "Sarah," Caleb said, a warning in his voice. "Well, you do." But Sarah's grin was unrepentant. The porch presented the first obstacle. 3 steps, none of them designed with a wheelchair in mind. Evelyn had navigated worse. The boarding house in Philadelphia had 5 steps and no rail, but her stomach still knotted as Caleb approached. "I'm going to tilt you back," he said. "Easier than trying to carry everything at once." She gripped the arms of her chair and tried not to think about what would happen if he lost his hold. But his hands were steady on the handles, his strength evident as he lifted the front wheels and maneuvered her up the steps with a care that suggested he'd been thinking about this problem. The front door was wide enough, barely. Her wheels scraped the frame on both sides, and she had to tuck her elbows in tight. But then they were through, and she was rolling into what would be her home. The interior was cleaner than she'd expected for a household of 3 people without a woman's touch, but there was a pervasive air of neglect that came from people too tired to do more than the bare minimum. Dust gathered in corners. The windows hadn't seen a proper washing in months, maybe years. Mending sat in a basket by the cold fireplace, and the mantel held an arrangement of objects that suggested they'd been set down and never picked up again. A broken watch, 3 rocks, a bird's nest, 2 buttons, and what looked like a child's tooth. "It's not much," Caleb said, and she heard defensiveness creeping into his tone. "It's honest," Evelyn replied, which was true. This was a house where people lived and struggled and survived. There was dignity in that. "And it has good bones." Sarah tugged at her sleeve. "Come see the kitchen. That's where we spend most time because it's warmest, and Papa says the parlor is for fancy folks who don't exist out here anyway." The kitchen was large and clearly the heart of the home. A massive iron stove dominated one wall, with a work table in the center and shelves lining the other walls. Everything was too high for Evelyn to reach comfortably from her chair: the shelves, the counter, even the pump handle at the sink. She filed that information away, already calculating what she could and couldn't do. The stove she could manage if she was careful. The table was perfect height, but the shelves would require help or creativity, and washing dishes at that sink would be nearly impossible without assistance. "The downstairs bedroom is through here," Caleb said, gesturing to a door off the kitchen. "Used to be my office, like Sarah said, but I moved my desk to the loft in the barn. Figured you'd need ground floor access." He'd been planning. The thought sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. He'd been planning for her, thinking about what she'd need, how to make this work. The room was small but adequate, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Someone, probably Caleb, had already cleared out most of the office furniture, though a bookshelf still lined one wall, crammed with leather-bound volumes. "I can move those books," Caleb said quickly. "Make more space for your things." "Don't you dare," Evelyn said, her voice sharper than intended. Then, softer. "Please. I'd like them to stay, if that's all right." Something shifted in his expression. "You really do read." "Latin, Greek, French, and enough German to be dangerous," she confirmed. "And yes, I really do read. It's one of the few pleasures that doesn't require legs." The words came out more bitter than she'd intended, and she saw him flinch. But before either of them could address it, Samuel appeared in the doorway. "Are you going to cook supper?" he asked, his tone making it clear he expected her to fail. "I suppose that depends on what's available and whether your father minds me taking over his kitchen." "Mind?" Caleb actually laughed, though it sounded rusty from disuse. Lady, if you can make something that doesn't taste like boot leather, I'll build you a throne to cook from." "A throne might be excessive," Evelyn said, fighting a smile. "But perhaps a stool, something to help me reach the upper shelves." "I can build a stool." He said it like a promise, and she found herself believing him. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. Caleb showed her where supplies were kept, apologizing for the disorganization. Sarah appointed herself official tour guide and wheelchair pusher, narrating everything they passed with the enthusiasm of a carnival barker. Samuel maintained his distance, watching from doorways and corners, his distrust obvious. By noon, Evelyn's arms ached from propelling herself around the house, and her head spun with information about chickens and horses and which neighbors were friendly and which weren't worth the time. But she'd also begun to see the patterns of this small broken family, the ways they'd adapted to loss and loneliness. Caleb threw himself into work with an intensity that suggested he was running from something. Sarah talked constantly, filling silence with chatter, as if afraid of what might rush in to replace it. And Samuel watched everything with the wariness of someone who'd learned that loving things meant losing them. "Lunch," Caleb announced, depositing bread, cheese, and dried beef on the kitchen table with the efficiency of someone who'd performed this ritual countless times. "It's not fancy." "It's fine," Evelyn assured him, though privately she was already planning changes. These people needed proper meals, needed someone to care about more than basic survival. They ate in awkward silence, broken only by Sarah's ongoing monologue about a chicken she'd named Princess Buttercup, who had strong opinions about the rooster. Evelyn found herself smiling despite her nervousness, despite the weight of Caleb's gaze when he thought she wasn't looking. After lunch, Caleb retreated to work in the barn, and Evelyn was left with the children. Sarah immediately settled on the floor beside her chair, looking up with expectant eyes. "Will you tell us a story?" she asked. "A real one, not like the ones Papa tells about cows and weather." "Hey," Samuel protested from his position near the door. "Papa's stories are fine." "They're boring," Sarah countered. "Last week he tried to tell us about a horse who learned to count, and he fell asleep in the middle." Evelyn bit back a laugh. "What kind of story would you like?" "Something with magic," Sarah said immediately. "An adventure. And maybe a princess who saves herself instead of waiting for a prince." "I don't like princess stories," Samuel announced, but he'd moved closer, she noticed. Closer, but still maintaining escape distance. "Then I'll tell you about a knight," Evelyn said, though not the kind you might expect. She launched into a tale she'd told her students back in Philadelphia about a knight who'd lost his sword arm in battle and had to learn to fight with the other. About how everyone said he was broken, useless, should retire to a monastery and pray. But the knight refused, learned new ways of doing old things, and eventually saved his kingdom not through strength, but through cleverness and adaptation. Sarah hung on every word. Samuel pretended not to listen, but his eyes never left her face. When she finished, Sarah said, "That's a story about you, isn't it?" The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze her. "Perhaps. A little. Papa says we're not supposed to talk about your chair," Sarah continued with the brutal honesty of the young. "He says it's not polite, but I think that's silly. It's right there. How are we supposed to pretend it's not?" "Sarah Grace?" Samuel started, looking horrified, but Evelyn laughed, a real laugh that surprised her. "Your father is trying to be kind, but you're not entirely wrong. The chair is here. I'm in it. Pretending otherwise helps no one." She met Sarah's curious gaze directly. "What do you want to know?" "Does it hurt?" "Not the chair itself. Sometimes my back hurts from sitting, sometimes my legs ache even though I can't feel them properly, which is very confusing." "Can you feel anything in them?" Sarah reached out tentatively, her small hand hovering over Evelyn's knee. "You can touch," Evelyn said softly. "It won't hurt me." Sarah's hand landed gently on Evelyn's leg, and the child's face scrunched in concentration. "Can you feel that?" "Barely. Like touching through thick wool." "Is it awful?" This from Samuel, who'd abandoned his post by the door and was now standing just a few feet away. "Being stuck in the chair?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. These children deserved honesty, not the pretty lies adults usually told. Sometimes, she admitted. Sometimes I wake up and forget, just for a moment, and I think about jumping out of bed or running downstairs. And then I remember, and yes, that's awful, but most of the time it's just how things are, like having brown hair instead of blonde, or being short instead of tall. It's part of me, not all of me. Papa says our mother was tall, Sarah said suddenly, her voice gone small. I don't remember. I was too little. The conversational whiplash nearly gave Eveline mental vertigo, but she recognized it for what it was, a test, a way of measuring whether this strange new woman could handle the important things. Tell me about her, Eveline said. I don't want to talk about her, Samuel snapped, his face flushing red. And you don't get to ask about her. You're not her. You'll never be her. He ran before Eveline could respond, his footsteps pounding up the stairs. A door slammed and the house shook. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. He's not mean. He's just sad. I know, sweetheart. Eveline held out her arms, and after a moment's hesitation, Sarah climbed into her lap, curling up like a much younger child. He's protecting himself. That's not meanness. That's survival. They sat like that for a long time, Sarah's small body warm and trusting against her chest. It had been so long since Eveline had held a child, had felt that absolute faith that she could somehow make things better. The weight of it was terrifying and exhilarating at once. When Caleb came in an hour later, dusty and tired, he stopped short at the sight of them. His daughter was asleep in Eveline's lap, and Eveline had her cheek resting on the child's hair, her eyes closed. Sorry, he said quietly, and she jerked awake. Didn't mean to startle you. It's fine, She looked down at Sarah, then back at him helplessly. She's heavier than she looks. The corner of his mouth twitched. Want me to take her? Please. He lifted Sarah with practiced ease, and the girl barely stirred, just mumbled something about dragons and settled against his shoulder. For a moment he stood there holding her, and Eveline saw the fierce love in his eyes, the kind of love that would burn the world down to keep his children safe. When he came back downstairs after depositing Sarah in her bed, his expression had shuddered again. Samuel give you trouble? Nothing I can't handle. She hesitated. He's testing me, seeing if I'll break. Will you? I don't break easily, Mr. Boone. I bend, I adapt, but I don't break. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. Dinner? If you'll help me reach the things I need, I can make us a proper meal, not just bread and cheese. They worked together in an awkward dance, him reaching high shelves while she directed operations from her chair. She discovered he had flour, lard, dried beans, salt pork, molasses, and a few precious eggs. Not much to work with, but she'd made do with less. As she worked, rolling dough for biscuits, setting beans to soak for tomorrow, frying salt pork with the skill of long practice, she felt Caleb watching her, not with pity or disgust, but with something she couldn't quite name. Curiosity, maybe, or reassessment. You really can cook, he said finally. Did you think I was lying about that too? The words came out sharper than intended, and she saw him stiffen. But then he said, Fair. I deserve that. They fell into silence again, but it was slightly easier now. Working silence, the kind that came from two people sharing a task even if they didn't yet share trust. Dinner was simple but hot, and Samuel emerged from his room when the smell of fresh biscuits wafted upstairs. He still wouldn't look at Eveline directly, but he ate 3 biscuits and 2 helpings of beans, which she took as a minor victory. After the meal, as Sarah helped clear plates and Samuel disappeared again, Caleb said, That was good. Best meal I've had since... He stopped, cleared his throat. In a long time. It's just basic fare. Still good. He stood, picked up his hat. I've got evening chores. You all right here? I've managed alone for 3 years, Mr. Boone. I think I can handle an evening. But after he left, the house felt bigger, emptier. Eveline wheeled herself to the parlor window and looked out across the darkening land. Somewhere out there, Caleb was doing whatever needed doing to keep this place running. In Philadelphia, she'd have been listening to her father hold court with his political cronies, or trapped in her room avoiding their stares. Here, she was useful. Here, maybe she could build something real. The sound of the front door opening broke her reverie, but it wasn't Caleb. It was Samuel, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed and his chin jutted out defiantly. "I don't want you here," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I don't care if you can cook or tell stories or if Sarah likes you. You're not my mother. You'll never be my mother. And someday you'll leave just like she did. And then what? We're supposed to just keep getting hurt over and over?" The pain in his voice made Evelyn's heart crack. She didn't move toward him, didn't try to touch or comfort. She just said, "You're right." That clearly wasn't what he'd expected. His aggressive stance faltered. "What?" "You're absolutely right. I'm not your mother. I can't replace her, and I wouldn't try to even if I could. The love you have for her, the grief you carry, those are yours. No one gets to take them away or tell you they don't matter." Samuel's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Then why are you here?" "Because your father asked me to come. Because I thought maybe I could help in small ways with the practical things that need doing. I'm not here to be your mother, Samuel. I'm just here to be, someone who cares. If you'll let me." "What if I don't want to let you?" "Then that's your choice, and I'll respect it. But I'll still be here, and I'll still care, whether you want me to or not. That's just how it works, I'm afraid." He stood there for a long moment, warring with himself. Then he said, his voice very small, "She died because of me." Evelyn's breath stopped. "What?" "Mama. She died having Samuel, me." He looked at the floor. "I heard Mrs. McCready tell someone once. Said Papa would have been better off if I died instead." Rage, pure and hot, flooded through Evelyn. She wanted to wheel herself to the McCready place and give that woman a piece of her mind that would peel paint. But Samuel needed something different right now. "Come here," she said gently. He hesitated, then shuffled closer. "Look at me." She waited until his tear-filled eyes met hers. "Mrs. McCready is a fool who doesn't know her ass from her elbow, and you can tell her I said so." That startled a watery laugh out of him. "You're not supposed to curse." "I'll curse when someone needs cursing about. Now listen to me carefully. Babies don't kill mothers. Sometimes bodies just fail. It's not the baby's fault, and it's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault. It's just one of the terrible, unfair things that happen in this world." "But Papa..." "Your Papa loves you more than anything in this world. I've seen it in the way he looks at you, the way he makes sure you're fed even when he forgets to feed himself. Whatever grief he carries, it's not directed at you." "How do you know?" "Because," she said softly, "I know what it looks like when someone blames you for existing. My father looked at me that way every day after the fire. Your father doesn't look at you like that. Not once, not ever." Samuel wiped his nose on his sleeve. "You promise?" "I promise." He stood there for another moment, then impulsively threw his arms around her neck in a fierce hug that nearly tipped her chair backward. She held him while he cried, the dam finally breaking on years of held-back grief. That's how Caleb found them when he came in 20 minutes later. His son sobbing in the arms of a woman they'd known less than a day, and Evelyn murmuring soft comfort in a voice that held its own tears. Their eyes met over Samuel's shaking shoulders, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps. Or the beginning of trust. Later, after Samuel had cried himself out and gone to bed, after Sarah had been tucked in with a story about brave knights and smart princesses, Caleb and Evelyn found themselves alone in the kitchen. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers, casting the room in warm shadow. "Thank you," Caleb said quietly, "for whatever you said to him. He hasn't cried like that since ever, really." "He needed to," Evelyn replied. "He's been carrying too much for too long." "Seems like a specialty of yours, seeing what people carry." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the hard exterior to the lonely man beneath. "Takes one to know one, Mr. Boone." "Caleb," he said suddenly. "Call me Caleb. All this Mr. Boone business makes me feel old." "Then you should call me Evelyn, unless you prefer to keep things formal." "Evelyn," he tested the name, and she liked the way it sounded in his rough voice. "Your sister, the real Clara. How'd she die?" Evelyn's hands tightened in her lap. "Fever. Fast and cruel. She was the good one, the beautiful one, the one everyone loved." and then she was just gone. And you took her name. I took her name because when I wrote letters as myself, as Evelyn Dorset, daughter of Judge Thaddeus Dorset, I got either proposals from men who wanted my father's connections or rejections from men who'd heard the stories. Clara's name was clean. Clara's name let me be just a woman looking for a chance. What stories? Caleb asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Evelyn stared into the dying fire. The fire wasn't an accident. 3 men broke into our house looking for my father. He'd sentenced someone they loved to hang, and they wanted revenge. My father wasn't home. I was. She paused, her voice dropping. They left me alive, but they made sure I'd never run from anything again. The silence that followed was heavy with horror. When Caleb spoke, his voice was rough with barely contained rage. Did they catch them? 2 of them. The third disappeared. My father built me a prison disguised as care, hired nurses, doctors, kept me locked in a room for my safety. I was 17 years old and he treated me like a broken doll to be kept on a shelf. She looked up at Caleb. When Clara died, I saw my chance, took her papers, sold what jewelry I had, and bought a train ticket as far as my money would take me. Montana seemed far enough. Jesus, Caleb breathed. So you see, I didn't just lie to you about a name, I lied about everything. I'm not some innocent schoolteacher seeking adventure. I'm a fugitive daughter running from a powerful man who thinks he owns me. If my father finds out where I am, she didn't finish the sentence. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Your father know you're in Montana? I don't think so. I was careful. Then he won't find out from me. He stood, moved to the stove, added wood to bank the fire for the night. When he turned back, his face was set in hard lines. You ran because you had to. I understand that. But now you're here, and you're under my roof. That means something. Anyone comes looking for Evelyn Dorset, they'll have to go through me first. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her throat tight. You barely know me. I know you made my daughter laugh. I know you made my son cry in a way he needed to. I know you cooked a dinner that felt like a home instead of just a house. He met her eyes directly. And I know what it's like to run from something that wants to break you. So yeah, maybe I barely know you, but I know enough. Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. She'd cried enough in Philadelphia to last a lifetime. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me yet. Month's not over. But his voice had lost its hard edge. Get some sleep. Morning comes early on a ranch, and tomorrow I've got to teach you how we do things around here. He left her sitting in the kitchen, surrounded by the sounds of a house settling for the night. Evelyn wheeled herself to her small room, transferred to the bed with practiced efficiency, and lay staring at the ceiling. 1 day down. 29 to go. But as she drifted towards sleep, she found herself thinking not about the days ahead, but about the warmth in Caleb's voice when he'd said her real name, about Samuel's arms around her neck, about Sarah's trust. Maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth staying for, even if it was just for a month. Morning light crept through the thin curtains of Evelyn's room, bringing with it the realization that yesterday had been real. She was actually here, on a Montana ranch, committed to a month-long trial of playing house with a widower and his traumatized children. The absurdity of it would have made her laugh if her ribs didn't ache from sleeping in an unfamiliar bed. She heard movement in the kitchen, the clank of the stove being opened, the shuffle of boots on wood floor. Caleb was already up, probably had been for hours if ranch life ran anything like she'd read about. Evelyn transferred herself to the wheelchair with the practiced efficiency of 3 years' repetition, dressed quickly in her second-best calico, and braided her hair with fingers that trembled only slightly. When she wheeled into the kitchen, Caleb was standing at the stove with his back to her, doing something that involved a lot of clanging and muttered curses. The smell of burning reached her nose. "Good morning," she said, and watched him jump like she'd fired a gun. "Didn't hear you." He turned, and she saw he was holding a pan with what might have once been intended as eggs, but now looked more like leather. "I was trying to get breakfast started before you woke up." "I can see that." She moved closer, surveying the damage. "How long have those been cooking?" 10 minutes? Maybe 15? They're supposed to be scrambled, I'm guessing. His jaw tightened with embarrassment. I can work cattle, fix fences, deliver a breech calf in the dark, but cooking defeats me every damn time. Then it's fortunate I'm here. She maneuvered her chair to the stove, took the pan from his hands before he could protest, and scraped the ruined eggs into the slop bucket. Start over. Break 6 eggs into that bowl. Try not to get shell in them. For a moment she thought he might argue, might assert his authority as master of this house, but instead he just nodded and reached for the egg basket. They worked in silence, him breaking eggs with surprising delicacy for such large hands, her heating fresh lard in the pan and showing him how to beat the eggs properly with milk and salt. The secret, she said as she poured the mixture into the hot pan, is patience. Low heat, constant stirring, remove them before they look done. They'll finish cooking in their own heat. That doesn't make sense. Most good cooking doesn't. It's instinct and practice. She stirred slowly, watching the eggs form soft curds. My mother taught me. Before she died, she made sure I could cook, clean, manage a household. She said a woman who could feed herself and others would never be completely helpless. She sounds wise. She was. My father married beneath his station to get her, and his family never let him forget it. But she held her head high, ran his house perfectly, and made sure I learned to do the same. Evelyn slid the eggs onto a platter, their surface glistening and perfect. Even when I couldn't walk anymore, she insisted I keep learning. Said the day I gave up on being useful was the day I might as well be dead. That's harsh. That's survival. She met his eyes. She died 6 months after the fire. Heart gave out, the doctor said. But I always thought she just couldn't bear seeing me broken. The raw honesty seemed to catch him off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said quietly, "You're not broken. You're adapted." Something warm unfurled in her chest at the words. Before she could respond, thunder sounded on the stairs, and Sarah burst into the kitchen still in her nightgown, her hair a wild tangle around her face. "It smells good! It smells so good! Is that real eggs? Samuel, get down here, we have real eggs!" Samuel appeared more slowly, his eyes still swollen from last night's crying. He wouldn't look at Evelyn directly, but he slid into his chair at the table without argument. Breakfast was a revelation for the Boone family. Real scrambled eggs, biscuits left over from last night and warmed in the oven, bacon fried crisp, and coffee that Caleb declared was the best he'd had in 5 years. Sarah talked nonstop. Samuel ate 3 helpings in silence, and Caleb kept glancing at Evelyn with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. After the meal, as the children scattered to their morning chores, Sarah to collect eggs, Samuel to feed the horses, Caleb lingered at the table with his coffee. "I need to ride out to check the fence lines in the north pasture," he said. "Won't be back until late afternoon. You going to be all right here alone with them? I survived yesterday, didn't I?" "Yesterday you weren't alone." He hesitated, his calloused fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "Samuel's still testing you, and Sarah gets into everything when she's not watched. Last week she decided to give the barn cat a bath. Nearly drowned the poor creature and herself in the water trough." "I'll manage," Evelyn said with more confidence than she felt. "Besides, I need to start understanding how this household actually functions. Can't do that with you hovering." The corner of his mouth twitched. "I don't hover." "You've been watching me like I might spontaneously combust since I arrived." "Can you blame me? You're not exactly what I expected." "No," she agreed. "I'm sure I'm not. But I'm what you've got for the next 28 days, so you might as well trust me to not burn down your house while you're gone." He studied her for another long moment, then nodded and stood. "There's a bell on the porch. If there's trouble, real trouble, ring it. Sound carries, and the McCready place is only 2 miles south. They'll come." "The same McCready who told Samuel he should have died instead of his mother?" Caleb's face went hard. "That was Martha McCready, and she's a bitter old woman who should have kept her mouth shut. But her husband John is decent enough, and their sons would come if you needed help." After he left, the house seemed to exhale. Evelyn heard Sarah singing to the chickens, heard Samuel's voice talking to the horses in the barn. Normal sounds of a normal morning, except nothing about this situation was normal. She spent the morning exploring the house more thoroughly, taking mental inventory of what needed doing. The mending basket was overflowing. The windows were filthy. The floors needed scrubbing. The pantry was a disaster of half-empty sacks and unlabeled jars. It would take weeks to set things right, and she only had a month. Sarah found her in the parlor, staring at the mantle collection with bemusement. "That's Samuel's tooth," Sarah said helpfully, pointing. "It fell out last winter and Papa said we should keep it because maybe the tooth fairy would come late. She never did, though." "I see. And the bird's nest?" "I found it after a storm. I was going to put it back, but I couldn't find the tree it came from, so I kept it instead. Papa says I'm a collector of unnecessary things." "I think collecting unnecessary things makes life more interesting," Evelyn said. "Though perhaps we could find a better way to display them. Do you have a box? Something special?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "Mama's jewelry box. Papa put it in the attic after she died, but he said Samuel and me could have it someday." "Then perhaps today is someday. Shall we ask your brother?" They found Samuel in the barn, mucking out stalls with the grim determination of someone performing penance. When Sarah explained their mission, his face shuddered. "That's Mama's," he said flatly. "Yes," Evelyn agreed, "which is why it should be used by her children, not gathering dust in an attic." "You just want to get rid of her things." "No, I want to honor her by letting the things she loved be useful again. There's a difference." Evelyn kept her voice gentle but firm. "Your mother would want you to have her jewelry box, wouldn't she? To keep your treasures safe?" Samuel's throat worked. "She always kept pretty things in it. Buttons, ribbons, a silver thimble Grandma gave her." "Then let's see if those things are still there. Maybe you and Sarah could each choose something to keep, something that's just yours." It took another 10 minutes of coaxing, but eventually Samuel agreed. The attic was predictably inaccessible to Evelyn's wheelchair, so she directed operations from the bottom of the ladder while the children climbed up and rummaged through the dusty space. "Found it!" Sarah's triumphant cry echoed down, followed by the appearance of a carved wooden box that had seen better days but still held traces of beauty in its intricate lid design. They spread the contents on the kitchen table like pirates dividing treasure. The silver thimble, wrapped in cloth, a handful of carved buttons, 3 ribbons, blue, green, and yellow, a locket with a broken chain, a small bottle of perfume mostly evaporated, and at the bottom, wrapped in paper, 2 letters. Samuel picked up one of the envelopes, his hands shaking. "This one's for me. It says, 'To my son Samuel, when you're old enough to read.'" Sarah grabbed the other. "Mine too. It says, 'To my Sarah girl, when you can read these words yourself.'" Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "Your mother wrote you letters before she died." "Papa never told us," Samuel whispered. "He never said anything about letters." "Perhaps he didn't know about them. Perhaps she hid them here, waiting for the right time." Evelyn's heart ached for these children, for the mother who'd known she might not survive childbirth but had tried to leave pieces of herself behind anyway. "Those letters are yours, private. You can read them now, or later, or never. But they belong to you." Sarah looked torn between desperate curiosity and fear. Samuel just stared at his envelope like it might explode. "I'll be in the parlor if you need me," Evelyn said quietly, giving them space for this moment that was too sacred for a stranger's presence. She heard them whispering in the kitchen, heard one of them start to cry, and then the other joining in. But she didn't intrude, just sat in her chair by the window and watched the Montana sky stretch endlessly overhead. An hour later, both children emerged red-eyed but somehow lighter. Sarah climbed immediately into Evelyn's lap, clutching her letter like a lifeline. "She said she loved me," Sarah whispered. "She said I was her sunshine, and she hoped I'd grow up brave and kind and would always remember to laugh." "That sounds like a good mother," Evelyn said softly. Samuel hovered nearby, his letter folded and refolded in his hands. "She said I was strong. She said I was born fighting, and she knew I'd keep fighting my whole life. She said," his voice cracked, "she said it wasn't my fault, that she chose to have me and Sarah, chose to take the risk, and she'd do it again even knowing what would happen." Evelyn held out her free arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Samuel stepped into it. She held both children while they cried, felt their tears soak through her dress, and wondered if their mother was somewhere watching, grateful that someone was here to catch her babies when they fell. The afternoon passed in a strange, gentle blur. Sarah wanted to organize her treasures in the jewelry box, so they spent an hour sorting stones by color, arranging the bird's nest on cotton wool, placing Samuel's tooth in the thimble like it was a precious gem. Samuel watched from a distance at first, then gradually crept closer until he was sitting on the floor beside them, offering suggestions about placement. "We should put Mama's ribbon in too," he said suddenly. "The blue one. She always wore blue." Sarah nodded solemnly, and they placed the ribbon in the box like they were performing a religious ritual. Evelyn felt tears prick her own eyes and blinked them back. She needed to be strong for these children, not dissolve into sentiment. "Tell us another story," Sarah demanded as they finished. "Tell us about the knight again, the one who lost his arm." "I told you that one yesterday." "So? It's a good story. Tell it again, but different. Tell us what happened next." So Evelyn did, spinning the tale further, telling them about the knight's daughter, who learned to fight with 2 swords because one wasn't enough, about the son who became a scholar because someone had to be smart enough to outwit the enemies that couldn't be defeated with steel. She told them about adaptation and resilience and the quiet courage it took to keep living when the world said, "You should give up." Samuel interrupted partway through. "That's us too, isn't it? The daughter and the son?" "Maybe," Evelyn admitted. "A little. And Papa's the knight? Perhaps. What do you think?" Samuel considered this seriously. "I think Papa's the knight who forgot he was still fighting. I think he got tired and sad and stopped believing he could win." The perceptiveness took Evelyn's breath away. "Then maybe he needs people to remind him," she said quietly. "People who believe in him even when he doesn't believe in himself." "People like you?" Sarah asked. "People like all of us," Evelyn corrected. "This family. Together." The word family hung in the air between them, fragile and dangerous. But neither child contradicted her, and Evelyn took that as a small victory. By the time Caleb returned, dusty and exhausted, the house had been transformed. Not in any dramatic way. The windows were still dirty, the floors still needed work, but in small touches that spoke of care. The jewelry box sat on the mantel, displayed proudly. Fresh bread cooled on the counter, filling the house with yeast and comfort. The mending basket had been reduced by half, and a pot of stew bubbled on the stove, rich with vegetables from the root cellar and meat from the smokehouse. Caleb stopped in the doorway, taking it all in. "Something smells incredible." "Beef stew," Evelyn said from her position at the stove, "and biscuits, though those won't be ready for another 20 minutes. Did the children—" He stopped, his eyes landing on the jewelry box. His face went carefully blank. "Where did that come from?" "The attic," Sarah said, appearing at his elbow. "We found Mama's letters, Papa. She wrote to us before she died." Caleb's face drained of color. "Letters?" "She hid them in her jewelry box," Samuel added, coming to stand beside his sister in unconscious solidarity. "Why didn't you tell us about them?" "I didn't know." Caleb's voice came out strangled. I didn't know she'd written anything." "They're private," Evelyn said quickly, sensing disaster brewing. "The children's letters from their mother, but they found them today while looking for the jewelry box, and I thought it would be good for them to have something to keep their treasures in." Caleb just stared at the box, his jaw working. Finally he said, "I'm going to wash up," and left the room abruptly. The children exchanged worried glances. Sarah whispered, "Is Papa mad?" "No, sweetheart. He's sad. Sometimes when people are very sad, it looks like anger because anger is easier to carry." Evelyn kept stirring the stew, giving her hands something to do. "Give him time." But when Caleb returned 20 minutes later, his hair wet from washing and his expression carefully neutral, tension still radiated from him. They ate dinner in near silence. The earlier warmth of the day evaporated into awkwardness. After the children went to bed, Caleb finally spoke. "You had no right to give them that box." Evelyn had been expecting this. "You're correct. I didn't ask permission. I apologize." "Do you?" His voice was harsh. "Because it seems like you've been here 2 days, and you're already rearranging my life, making decisions about my children, digging up the past I've been trying to let rest." "The past was never resting," Evelyn said quietly. "It was festering. There's a difference." "Don't!" He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Don't pretend you understand this family after 2 days. Don't pretend you know what's best for my children when you barely know their names. You're right, Evelyn said, keeping her voice level despite the hurt blooming in her chest. I don't understand. I don't know what's best. But I know those children needed their mother's words, needed to know she loved them, needed to stop carrying the guilt of her death like stones in their pockets. Samuel told you. It wasn't a question. He told me he thought he killed her, that Mrs. McCready said you'd be better off if he'd died instead. And he believed it, Caleb. He's 7 years old, and he believed he was a murderer. Caleb's fist came down on the table hard enough to make the dishes jump. That goddamn woman. I told her to stay away from my children, told her if she couldn't keep her poison to herself. It's not about Martha McCready, Evelyn interrupted. It's about a little boy who needed to hear that his birth wasn't his mother's death sentence, who needed his mother's words telling him he was wanted, chosen, loved. She leaned forward, willing him to understand. Those letters were a gift his mother left because she knew he'd need them. And you keeping them hidden, even accidentally, was causing more harm than good. You don't get to make those decisions. But some of the heat had left his voice. No, Evelyn agreed. I don't. This isn't my family, these aren't my children, and at the end of the month I'll be gone, and you'll go back to managing things however you see fit. But while I'm here, I'm going to do what I think is right. And if that means occasionally overstepping, then I apologize. But I won't apologize for giving those children their mother's love. They stared at each other across the kitchen table, and Evelyn saw the moment his anger cracked. He slumped back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 43 years. I miss her, he said, his voice raw. Every damn day I miss her. And that box, those things, they were hers. Looking at them feels like being stabbed all over again. I know, Evelyn said softly. Grief is like that. It ambushes you when you least expect it, but your children need to remember her without it destroying them. They need to know their mother as a person, not just as a ghost you're all too afraid to speak about. She was so alive, Caleb said, staring at nothing. Catherine. She laughed at everything, found joy in the smallest things. When she was pregnant, she was terrified. The doctor had warned her it would be dangerous, but she was also so excited. She wanted a big family, wanted the house full of children and noise and life. Tell me about her, Evelyn said, and watched surprise flicker across his face. Why? Because the children need to hear it. Because keeping her memory locked away doesn't honor her, it buries her. And because maybe you need to remember the good along with the grief. So he did. Sitting in that kitchen as the fire burned down and the night deepened outside, Caleb told stories about his wife. How they'd met at a dance, how she'd turned down his first 3 proposals because she said he needed to learn to ask properly, how she'd insisted on planting a vegetable garden even though the Montana soil fought her every step, how she'd sung while she cooked, how she'd read the children's stories every night, how she'd loved this hard land with a fierceness that matched his own. Evelyn listened, and as she listened, she felt something shift inside her chest. This was a man who had loved deeply and lost terribly. This was a man who'd spent 5 years trying to be both parents to children who deserved better than his stumbling attempts. This was a man who needed help, but was too proud and too hurt to ask for it. She would have liked you, Caleb said suddenly. Catherine. She would have appreciated how you see past the obvious to what's really there. I doubt that, Evelyn said. She'd probably have resented another woman in her kitchen, taking care of her children. No, she was practical above all else. She'd have been glad someone was here to help. He paused, then added quietly, I'm glad you're here, even if I'm terrible at showing it. The admission hung between them, tentative and true. Evelyn felt warmth spread through her chest despite her best efforts to remain detached. This was dangerous territory. She'd come here for practicality, for survival, not for connection. Caring about this man and his children would only make leaving harder when the month ended. But it was already too late for detachment. Somewhere in the last 2 days, she'd started to care despite herself. I should sleep, she said, suddenly needing distance. Morning comes early. Evelyn. He stopped her as she turned her chair toward her room. Thank you. For the letters. foreseeing what I was too blind to notice. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and wheeled away before she could do something foolish like cry or confess that she was starting to care about this broken family more than was wise. In her small room, lying in the dark, Eveline stared at the ceiling and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. She'd come to Montana running from her past, looking for safety in anonymity. Instead, she'd found a widower with grief etched into every line of his face and 2 children who desperately needed someone to love them. 26 days left. 26 days to help this family heal enough to stand on their own. 26 days to guard her own heart against the dangerous possibility of belonging. Through the walls, she heard Caleb moving around the house, banking the fire, checking locks, performing the nightly rituals of keeping his family safe. She heard his heavy tread on the stairs, heard his boots hit the floor above her head. And she thought about how good it had felt to sit in that kitchen and listen to him talk about his wife without jealousy, without resentment, just with the understanding that love didn't die just because a person did. That Catherine Boone would always be part of this family, and that was as it should be. Eveline could work within those boundaries, could help without replacing, could care without claiming. She'd spent 3 years learning to live within the limitations of her body. Surely she could learn to live within the limitations of this situation, even if every instinct she had was screaming that she was already in too deep, that caring about the Boones would end in heartbreak, that the smart thing would be to take that train east before she got any more entangled in their lives. But Eveline had never been particularly smart when it came to her heart. And as sleep finally claimed her, she admitted to herself what she'd been denying since yesterday. She didn't want to leave. Not in 26 days, maybe not ever. The question was whether Caleb and his children would want her to stay, and whether she could survive the answer if they didn't. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and terrifying. Eveline woke before dawn to help Caleb with breakfast, the kitchen filling with the smell of coffee and frying bacon, while they worked in companionable silence. The children tumbled downstairs with increasing enthusiasm as meals improved from survival rations to actual food. Sarah appointed herself Eveline's assistant in all things, chattering constantly while learning to knead bread and churn butter. Samuel remained cautious but had stopped looking at her like she might vanish at any moment. On the 8th day, Caleb built her the promised stool, a sturdy wooden platform on wheels that allowed her to reach the higher shelves without assistance. He'd stayed up past midnight in the barn working on it, and when he presented it at breakfast, Eveline had felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. "It's perfect," she'd said, running her hands over the smooth wood. "It's practical," he had corrected, but his ears had gone red with pleasure at her reaction. The house slowly transformed under her care. Windows were washed until they sparkled, floors were scrubbed. The mending was finally finished, and she'd started making new shirts for Samuel, who was growing faster than his clothes could keep up. In the evenings, she read to the children from the books in her room, Homer in the original Greek, which made Samuel wrinkle his nose but Sarah found fascinating, and Shakespeare, which they both loved for the drama and sword fights. Caleb would sit nearby, pretending to work on his account books, but she'd catch him listening, his pen frozen mid-scratch, as she voiced different characters with theatrical flair she hadn't used since teaching in Philadelphia. On the 14th day, disaster nearly struck. Eveline was in the kitchen making preserves when she heard Sarah scream. Not the playful shriek of childhood games, but real terror that turned her blood to ice. She abandoned the boiling pot and wheeled toward the door as fast as her arms could propel her, nearly tipping the chair on the threshold. The scene that greeted her in the yard made her heart stop. Sarah stood frozen 3 feet from a coiled rattlesnake, its tail buzzing warning, its head raised to strike. The child's face was white with fear, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she had the sense to stand absolutely still. Samuel was running from the barn, shouting for his father. But Caleb was in the far pasture, too far away to help in time. The snake's head drew back, preparing to strike, and Eveline's mind went blank with panic. She had no weapon, nothing within reach except the heavy glass ink bottle she'd carried out to the porch that morning to write letters. Her hands moved before conscious thought could interfere, grabbing the bottle and hurling it with every ounce of strength she possessed. The bottle flew true. 3 years of practicing precision from a seated position paying off in the most unlikely way. It struck the snake just behind its head with a sickening crack, and the creature's body went rigid, then limp. Dead or stunned, Evelyn couldn't tell, but Sarah was already running, throwing herself at Evelyn with such force they nearly both toppled from the chair. "It's all right, you're all right, I've got you," Evelyn murmured into the child's hair, her own heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Samuel reached them seconds later, a pitchfork clutched in his hands. He stared at the snake, then at Evelyn, his eyes wide with something like awe. "You killed it! You saved her!" "I got lucky," Evelyn managed, though her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold on to Sarah. "You saved my sister." Samuel's voice broke on the words, and then he was crying, dropping the pitchfork and wrapping his arms around both Evelyn and Sarah in a fierce embrace. That's how Caleb found them 5 minutes later, drawn by Samuel's earlier shouts. 3 people tangled together beside a dead snake, all of them crying for different reasons. "What happened?" His voice was sharp with fear as he swung down from his horse. "Is anyone hurt?" "Miss Evelyn saved me," Sarah hiccuped through her tears. "The snake was going to bite me and she threw her ink bottle and killed it, and Samuel said I could have died, but I didn't because she saved me." Caleb's eyes found the snake, the shattered ink bottle, then Evelyn's face. She watched understanding dawn, watched him realize how close he'd come to losing his daughter, and saw something crack in his carefully maintained control. He knelt beside them, pulling all 3 into his arms without seeming to care about propriety or boundaries. Evelyn found herself pressed against his chest, could feel his heart racing, could smell horse and leather, and something essentially him. "Thank you," he said against her hair, his voice rough. "God, Evelyn, thank you." They stayed like that for a long moment, a knot of relief and fear and gratitude, until Sarah pulled back and said with the resilience of the young, "Can we keep the snakeskin? Samuel said rattlesnake skin brings good luck." The tension broke into startled laughter. Caleb stood, lifting Sarah with him, and extended his free hand to help Evelyn straighten her chair, which had tilted during the embrace. His fingers lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. "We'll skin it," he promised Sarah, "and you can have the rattles too if you want." "I want Miss Evelyn to have them," Sarah declared, "for saving me." That evening, after the children were in bed and the excitement had finally died down, Evelyn found herself alone with Caleb on the front porch. He'd brought her tea, badly made but warm, and sat down on the steps near her chair. "I can't stop thinking about what could have happened," he said quietly. "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't acted so fast." "But I was there," Evelyn interrupted gently. "And she's fine. Don't torture yourself with might-have-beens." "That's rich coming from you," but his tone was gentle, almost teasing. "I've seen the way you stare out at the land sometimes, like you're measuring all the distance between here and where you came from." She couldn't deny it. "Sometimes I wonder if my father's found out where I am, if he sent men looking, if one day I'll wake up and find myself being dragged back to Philadelphia to live in that gilded cage he built. Over my dead body." The fierceness in his voice surprised her. "I meant what I said before. You're under my protection now. Anyone wants to take you anywhere, they go through me first." "You barely know me, Caleb. Why would you fight for me?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "My wife, Catherine. She used to say that family wasn't just blood. It was the people who showed up when you needed them, who stood beside you when things got hard, who made you want to be better than you were." He turned to look at her directly. "You've shown up for my children every day since you got here. You've made this house feel like a home again, instead of just a place we sleep. You've seen past our broken pieces to what we could be." He paused. "That makes you family in my book, and I protect family." Evelyn's throat went tight. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just stay." The words came out raw, vulnerable. "I know we agreed on a month, know you've got the right to leave, but I'm asking if you'd consider staying longer. Not as a temporary arrangement, but—" He trailed off, seeming to lose his nerve. "But what?" Her heart was pounding. "But as my wife. Proper-like, not just on paper, but for real." He stood abruptly, paced to the edge of the porch. "I know it's only been 2 weeks. I know I'm not much of a catch. I'm older than you, got baggage that could sink a ship, and this ranch barely turns a profit in good years. But my children love you, and He stopped, his shoulders tight. "I care about you, Evelyn. More than I probably should. More than is smart after such a short time. And I think maybe you care about us too." She did. God help her, she did. Somewhere in the chaos of rattlesnakes and preserves and bedtime stories, she'd fallen for this hard man and his wounded children. She'd started imagining a future here, on this harsh, beautiful land, building something real and lasting. But fear was a powerful thing. What if I'm not enough? The question burst out before she could stop it. What if being in this chair means I fail you when it matters most? What if there's another snake and I can't reach my children in time, or a fire and I can't get them out, or 100 other disasters where my legs matter more than my heart? Your children? Caleb turned back to her, and his face was soft in the lamplight spilling from the window. You called them your children. She hadn't even realized. I didn't mean, no, don't take it back. He moved closer, knelt so they were eye level. They are yours if you want them. Sarah's been calling you Mama Evelyn to the chickens when she thinks no one's listening, and Samuel asked me yesterday if you were going to stay forever. What did you tell him? That I hoped so, but that it was up to you. He took her hands carefully, like they were something precious. I won't lie and say the chair doesn't scare me sometimes. I worry about you getting hurt, about not being here when you need help. But you know what scares me more? Going back to the way things were before you came. Watching my children forget how to laugh. Eating burned beans and sleeping alone and pretending that half a life is enough. Catherine, Evelyn started. Catherine is gone. His voice was gentle but firm. I loved her with everything I had, and I'll always carry that love. But she's not coming back, and spending the rest of my life mourning her doesn't honor her memory. You know what would honor her? Living. Actually living, not just surviving. Giving our children a mother who loves them, a home that feels whole, a future worth believing in. Our children, Evelyn whispered, if you'll have us. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I know I'm asking a lot. I know you could find someone younger, smoother, without all this baggage. But I promise you this, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. I will build ramps and lower shelves and carry you anywhere your chair can't go. I will stand between you and anyone who thinks you're less because of this chair, and I will love you, Evelyn Dorset, with the same fierce devotion I give to everything I claim as mine. She was crying now, couldn't help it. I'm still learning how to let people love me. Then we'll learn together. He kissed her knuckles, the gesture courtly and sweet. Say yes. Please. Say you'll stay. The smart answer would be to wait, to finish the month they'd agreed on, to make sure this wasn't just gratitude for saving Sarah or his loneliness manifesting as affection. But Evelyn had spent 3 years being smart and careful and safe. And where had it gotten her? Alone in a boarding house, using a dead sister's name, too afraid to risk anything. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll stay. I'll marry you properly. The smile that broke across his face transformed him, made him look years younger. He surged forward and kissed her, brief and chaste but full of promise, and Evelyn felt something long frozen inside her chest begin to thaw. They sat on that porch until the stars came out, making plans and promises, talking about everything and nothing. Evelyn told him more about Philadelphia, about her father's controlling nature, and her mother's quiet strength. Caleb told her about the war, about the nightmares he still sometimes had, about building this ranch from nothing with hands that had been trained for killing but had to learn gentleness. I want to do this right, Caleb said as the night deepened around them. Take you into town, get you a proper ring, have the preacher marry us in front of witnesses. No secrets, no hidden arrangements. I want everyone to know you're my wife. Even though people will talk, let them talk. By the time they're done gossiping, we'll be too happy to care. But not everyone in Silver Butte was content to merely gossip. The trouble started 3 days later when Evelyn accompanied Caleb and the children into town for supplies. It was her first trip back since arriving, and she dressed carefully in her best dress, still worn but clean and pressed, with her hair in an elaborate braid Sarah had helped create. The stares started the moment Caleb lifted her from the wagon. She'd expected that, had steeled herself for the curiosity and judgment. What she hadn't expected was the open hostility on some faces. Martha McCready was waiting outside the general store like a spider in her web, Her sharp features twisted into an expression of malicious satisfaction. Two other women stood with her, their postures identical in their censure. "Caleb Boone," Martha called out, her voice carrying across the street. "I need a word." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he nodded to Evelyn and the children to go ahead into the store. Evelyn wanted to protest, wanted to stand beside him for whatever was coming, but Sarah was tugging her chair toward the store with the single-minded determination of a child who'd been promised peppermint sticks. Inside, Evelyn tried to focus on their shopping list, but her attention kept drifting to the window where she could see Caleb's tense posture as Martha McCready spoke, gesturing emphatically. The other women nodded along like a Greek chorus of disapproval. "That's Mrs. McCready," Samuel said quietly, appearing at her elbow. "The one I told you about." "I remember." Evelyn kept her voice level despite the anger simmering in her gut. "She's mean," Sarah added, peering around a barrel of dried beans. "She told Papa he should send us to an orphanage because we're too much trouble for a man alone." "She said that?" Evelyn's hands clenched on her chair arms. "Papa told her where she could put her opinions," Samuel said with grim satisfaction. "Used words we're not supposed to repeat." Through the window, Evelyn watched Caleb's face go hard, watched him say something sharp that made Martha McCready step back. But the woman wasn't done, she could tell. Martha was the type who viewed other people's happiness as a personal affront, who couldn't rest until she'd pulled everyone down to her level of misery. Caleb came into the store 5 minutes later, his expression thunderous. "Get what you need," he told Evelyn shortly. "We're not staying long." "What did she say?" Evelyn asked quietly, while the children were distracted by the candy jars. "Nothing worth repeating." "Caleb?" He sighed, scrubbing a hand over his face. "She's calling a town meeting, tonight. Says the community needs to discuss whether it's appropriate for me to marry a—" He stopped, his jaw working. "Whether it's appropriate for you to be living on my ranch, helping raise my children." The words hit like a slap. "Because of the chair. Because she's a miserable old biddy who can't stand seeing anyone else happy," Caleb corrected fiercely. "Don't let her poison get into your head." But the poison was already there, familiar and bitter. This was why she'd left Philadelphia, why she'd used her sister's name, why she'd been so desperate to find somewhere that would accept her. Because people like Martha McCready existed everywhere, ready to declare her unfit, unsuitable, unsurvivable. The meeting was held at the town hall that evening. Caleb wanted Evelyn to stay at the ranch, wanted to shield her from whatever was coming, but she'd insisted on attending. This concerned her directly, and she refused to hide like she had something to be ashamed of. The hall was packed. Seemingly the entire town had turned out for the spectacle. Evelyn kept her spine straight and her chin high as Caleb pushed her chair down the center aisle, ignoring the whispers that followed in their wake. Sarah and Samuel flanked them like small guards, their faces set in identical expressions of defiance. Martha McCready stood at the front, flanked by her supporters. The town mayor, a balding man named Henderson, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, called the meeting to order. "I believe Mrs. McCready requested this gathering," Henderson said wearily. "Martha, you have the floor." Martha stepped forward, her eyes glittering with righteous fervor. "Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. We all know Caleb Boone is a respected member of this community, a veteran, a rancher, a man who's weathered terrible tragedy." Her voice dripped false sympathy. "Which is why it pains me to see him making such a grave mistake." "Get to the point, Martha," someone called from the back. "The point," Martha said sharply, "is that Mr. Boone intends to marry this woman." She gestured at Evelyn like she was pointing out vermin. A woman who cannot walk, cannot work, cannot fulfill the basic duties of a wife and mother. A woman who will be nothing but a burden on a man who already has too much to bear. The words landed like stones, and Evelyn felt each one. But she didn't look away, didn't give Martha the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "Furthermore," Martha continued, gaining momentum, "she's been living in his house, alone with him, and those children, for weeks now, without marriage, without chaperone, without any thought for propriety or decency. It's a scandal, and as upstanding members of this community, we have a responsibility to speak out against—" "That's enough." Caleb's voice cut through Martha's speech like a blade. He stood, moving to stand beside Evelyn's chair, one hand coming to rest on her shoulder. "You've made your point. Now sit down and let me make mine." Martha's mouth pinched tight, but she sat. The hall went silent. Caleb looked around at the assembled townspeople, his expression hard. You all know me. Known me for 10 years since I came here after the war. I've never asked this town for anything I didn't earn. Never expected charity or special treatment. I work hard, pay my debts, and raise my children the best I can. Heads nodded around the room. So when I tell you that Evelyn Dorset is the best thing that's happened to my family in 5 years, I expect you to take me at my word. His hand tightened on Evelyn's shoulder. You want to talk about what a wife and mother should be? Let me tell you what she's done in 2 weeks. She's cooked meals that made my children remember what a real home feels like. She's mended clothes, washed windows, kept accounts, and taught my kids more than I could in a year of trying. She saved my daughter's life when a rattlesnake would have killed her. She's given my son permission to grieve his mother properly for the first time since she died. His voice had gone rough with emotion. So don't you dare stand there and tell me she's not capable. Don't you dare suggest she's a burden. She's stronger than most men I know, including half the ones in this room. But Caleb, Martha tried to interrupt, her condition, Caleb said flatly, is that she can't walk. That's it. She can think, feel, love, teach, cook, clean, and do just about anything else that matters. The only thing she can't do is stand up. And you know what? I've got 2 working legs. I can stand for both of us when standing matters. Someone in the back started clapping. Then another person joined in, and another, until half the hall was applauding and Martha McCready's face had gone purple with rage. This isn't over, Martha hissed. People need to know the truth about her, about who she really is. Evelyn's blood ran cold. How could Martha know anything about her past? Unless... The truth? Caleb's voice had gone dangerous. What truth would that be, Martha? I wrote to contacts in Philadelphia, Martha said, a nasty smile spreading across her face. Asked around about a Clara Emerson. Funny thing, there's no record of any Clara Emerson matching her description. But there is a record of Evelyn Dorset, daughter of Judge Thaddeus Dorset, the same Evelyn Dorset who disappeared 3 months ago and is being actively searched for by her father. The room erupted. Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling the life she'd been building crumble around her. Of course Martha had investigated. Of course she'd found out. And now everyone knew she was a liar and a runaway, and Caleb would realize he'd been defending someone who'd been deceiving him from the start. But Caleb's hand didn't leave her shoulder. If anything, his grip tightened, anchoring her. So she used a different name, he said calmly. So what? Martha sputtered. So what? She lied to you. She's been lying to everyone. And her father has every right to... Her father, Caleb interrupted, his voice gone cold, has no rights over a grown woman. And if Judge Dorset thinks he can come to Montana and take her anywhere she doesn't want to go, he's welcome to try, though I can't promise what kind of welcome he'll receive. You're threatening a judge? Martha looked delighted. I'm stating facts. Evelyn is here of her own free will. She's committed no crime, and she's under my protection. Caleb looked around the room, meeting eyes directly. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me, personally. The threat was clear, and Caleb Boone was not a man anyone wanted to face in a personal dispute. Mayor Henderson cleared his throat. I think we've heard enough. Martha, your concerns are noted, but Mr. Boone is right. Miss Dorset is a grown woman who's broken no laws. If she chooses to marry him, that's their business. He banged his gavel. This meeting is adjourned. The crowd began to disperse, some people stopping to shake Caleb's hand or nod respectfully at Evelyn, but others left with Martha McCready, their faces set in judgment. Outside, Evelyn finally let herself shake. I'm so sorry. I should have told you about my real identity from the start. I should have... Stop. Caleb knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. I knew you were running from something. I knew you had secrets. And I chose to trust you anyway, chose to believe that whatever you'd left behind, you had good reason. My father will come, Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. Martha's letter means he knows where I am now. He'll come, and he'll try to take me back, and he has money and influence, and I have a ranch full of hands who'd ride into hell for me, a town that mostly respects me, and a mean streak a mile wide when it comes to protecting what's mine. Caleb cupped her face gently. Let him come. Let him try. I meant what I said in there. You're under my protection now, and I protect what's mine. Sarah and Samuel had stayed close, listening. Now Sarah said fiercely, "We won't let anyone take you away, Mama Evelyn." The casual use of Mama made Evelyn's heart clench. "Sweetheart, I'm not. We haven't even." "You're ours," Samuel said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "Papa said so, and what Papa says goes." Caleb smiled despite the tension. "I did say that, didn't I?" He stood, brushing dust from his knees. "Let's go home. We've given this town enough to gossip about for one night." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both children drooping with exhaustion from the emotional evening. Evelyn's mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Her father finding her father forcing her to return, her father destroying Caleb's reputation to punish them both. But when they reached the house and Caleb carried her inside, when she felt his arms steady and strong around her, some of the panic receded. "We should marry quickly," she said as he settled her in her chair. "Before my father can interfere. If we're legally married, it's harder for him to claim I'm incompetent or need his guardianship." "We'll ride into town tomorrow," Caleb agreed. "Get the license, have the preacher do it. No fancy ceremony, but legal and binding." "You're sure?" Evelyn searched his face. "You're absolutely sure you want to tie yourself to this mess? Because once we're married, my problems become yours." "Evelyn." He knelt again, and she thought distantly that this man spent a lot of time on his knees around her. "Your problems became mine the moment I decided to keep you. The marriage just makes it official." He kissed her forehead gently. "Besides, I'm looking forward to having problems that don't involve burnt beans and lonely nights." Despite everything, she laughed. "Your standards are remarkably low. My standards," he corrected, "are exactly where they need to be." That night, lying in her small room, Evelyn stared at the ceiling and tried to believe that tomorrow she'd become Evelyn Boone, that she'd have a legal right to stay here, to be part of this family, to build a life that was truly hers. But fear whispered that it couldn't be this simple, that happiness like this didn't come to women like her, that somewhere her father was already planning how to destroy everything she'd found. She tried to silence the fear, tried to focus on Caleb's promises and the children's acceptance, tried to believe that love and determination could overcome money and influence. But experience had taught her that the world didn't work that way. And as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it equal measures of hope and dread. Evelyn dressed with trembling hands in the only good dress she owned, the green one she'd worn on the train. Sarah appeared at her door already chattering about weddings and flowers, seemingly oblivious to the tension that had kept Evelyn awake most of the night. "Papa says we're going to town to make you officially our mama," Sarah announced, climbing onto Evelyn's bed. "He says after today nobody can say you don't belong with us." "That's the hope," Evelyn murmured, pinning her hair with fingers that refused to steady. "Are you scared?" The question was so direct, so innocently perceptive, that Evelyn had to pause. "A little," she admitted. "Big changes are always scary, even good ones." "Mama, my first mama, she wrote in her letter that being scared means you're brave enough to try something that matters." Sarah picked at the worn quilt. "I think marrying Papa matters. I think you're very brave." Evelyn pulled the child close, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine that clung to her hair. "Thank you, sweet girl. I think you're very brave, too." Caleb was waiting by the wagon when they emerged, already dressed in what must have been his best clothes, a clean shirt, vest that had seen better days but was carefully brushed, and a string tie that looked like it was strangling him. He pulled at it uncomfortably when he saw Evelyn watching. "Haven't worn this thing in 5 years," he muttered. "Forgot how much I hate it." "You look handsome," Evelyn said, and meant it. There was something about seeing this rough rancher dressed up that made her heart skip. "You look beautiful." The words came out gruff but sincere, and heat flooded Evelyn's cheeks. Samuel appeared from the barn, also cleaned up and dressed in clothes that almost fit. "Can we go? I want to get this over with before Mrs. McCready finds out and tries to stop it." Caleb's expression darkened. "Nobody's stopping anything. But yeah, let's move." The ride into town felt interminable. Every bump made Evelyn wince. Every turn brought them closer to either her future or her ruin. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong, that happiness this close was just the universe setting her up for a harder fall. Silver Butte was quiet when they arrived, most folks already at their business or still eating breakfast. Caleb helped Evelyn down and into her chair with practiced ease, then led their small party toward the church at the end of Main Street. Reverend Walsh was a kindly man in his 60s who'd buried Caleb's first wife and baptized his children. He opened the door with a welcoming smile that faltered only slightly when he saw the wheelchair. "Caleb, good to see you, and this must be Miss Dorset." He extended his hand, which Evelyn shook gratefully. "I heard about the town meeting last night."
Shame how some folks can't mind their own business.
"We're here to get married," Caleb said without preamble.
Today, if you can manage it."
Walsh's eyebrows rose.
"Well now, that's rather sudden. Have you filed for a license?"
"Not yet, but the clerk's office is 2 buildings down, and I figure we can handle that first if you'll agree to do the ceremony after." "It's highly irregular," Walsh said slowly, studying them both. Then his expression softened. "But then again, who am I to question when 2 people want to commit their lives to each other? Go get your license. I'll prepare the church." The clerk's office was presided over by a nervous young man named Timothy, who'd only been in the position for 3 months. He stammered through the paperwork, clearly uncomfortable but professional enough to complete the process without incident. Within 30 minutes, they had a legal marriage license, and Evelyn was staring at her real name written in official ink for the first time in months. "Still time to change your mind," Caleb said quietly as they left the office. "If you're having doubts, if this feels too fast—" "I'm not having doubts about you," Evelyn interrupted. "I'm having doubts about whether we can actually pull this off before something goes wrong." As if summoned by her words, a commotion erupted at the far end of the street. A hired carriage, expensive, out of place in rough Silver Butte, was pulling to a stop in front of the hotel. And stepping out of that carriage, his face set in lines of cold fury, was Judge Thaddeus Dorset. Evelyn's world tilted. No, he can't be here already. Martha only wrote to Philadelphia 3 days ago." "Maybe she wrote earlier," Caleb said grimly, positioning himself between Evelyn and her father. "Stay behind me." But Thaddeus had already spotted them. He strode down the boardwalk with the confidence of a man accustomed to people clearing his path, his expensive suit and polished shoes marking him as someone of importance. 2 men flanked him, hired muscle, from the look of them, thick-necked and mean-eyed. "Evelyn Marie Dorset," her father's voice carried the weight of courtroom authority. "You will come with me. Now." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Evelyn was proud that her voice didn't shake. "You're unwell, daughter. Clearly not in your right mind, running off to this godforsaken territory, living in sin with some rancher." "Watch your mouth." Caleb's voice was deadly quiet. "That's my soon-to-be wife you're talking about." Thaddeus's lip curled. "Wife? You think I'll allow my daughter to throw her life away on a dirt farmer who can barely keep his own children clothed? She's coming home where she belongs, where she can receive proper care." "Proper care?" Evelyn's fear was rapidly transforming into rage. "You mean locked in a room, drugged into compliance, treated like a shameful secret you can hide away? That's not care, Father. That's a prison." "You're hysterical." Thaddeus gestured to his hired men. "Gentlemen, if you would—" The men moved forward, but suddenly they weren't facing just Caleb. Samuel had grabbed the pitchfork from the wagon bed and stood with it raised, his young face set in fierce determination. Sarah positioned herself in front of Evelyn's chair, arms spread wide like she could physically block grown men. "You're not taking our mama," Sarah said, her voice high but unwavering. And from seemingly nowhere, townspeople began appearing. The shopkeeper who'd sold them supplies, the blacksmith who'd repaired their wagon wheel last month, John McCready, Martha's own husband, looking embarrassed but determined. Even Reverend Walsh emerged from the church, his expression stern. "Judge Dorset," Walsh said, his gentle voice somehow carrying authority, "I don't know how things are done in Philadelphia, but here in Montana, we don't look kindly on men who threaten women who've done them no harm." "This is a family matter," Thaddeus spat. "No, sir," Caleb corrected. "This is a woman trying to escape a man who treated her like property instead of a person. And you'll find that Montana's full of folks who left the East for exactly that reason." He moved closer, and something in his stance made both hired men step back. Your daughter is over 21. She's broken no laws, and she's made it clear she doesn't want to go with you. So I suggest you get back in that fancy carriage and head home before this situation gets any uglier than it needs to. You dare threaten me? Thaddeus's face went purple. I'm a federal judge. I have connections, influence, and I have a community that stands with me. Caleb gestured at the growing crowd. Plus 4 ranch hands who'll be here any minute. I sent word as soon as I saw your carriage. So you can make this easy and leave peacefully, or you can make it hard. Your choice. Thaddeus's eyes swept the assembled townspeople, calculating odds. Evelyn saw the moment he realized he was outmatched, at least physically, but the calculating gleam in his eyes suggested he wasn't done yet. Fine. He smoothed his suit with jerky movements. But understand this, daughter. You marry this man, you're dead to me. No inheritance, no family, no support if things go badly. You'll be truly alone. I've been alone since Mother died, Evelyn said quietly. The difference is now I've found people who actually care about me, not just about controlling me. Something flickered across Thaddeus's face. Hurt, perhaps, or the ghost of genuine feeling beneath the anger. But it vanished quickly, replaced by cold disdain. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Evelyn agreed. But it's my mistake to make. That's what you never understood, Father. My life belongs to me, even if my legs don't work, especially because my legs don't work. For a long moment, father and daughter stared at each other across the dusty street. Then Thaddeus turned sharply on his heel and stalked back to his carriage, his hired men trailing behind like confused dogs. This isn't over, he called back. I'll fight your marriage. I'll contest your competency. I'll make sure you'll do nothing, a new voice interrupted. Martha McCready pushed through the crowd, her face strangely pale. Because if you try anything legal against my testimony, I'll admit under oath that I wrote to you with false accusations out of spite and malice, that I lied about Evelyn being incapable or unfit, that everything I said at that town meeting was motivated by jealousy and nothing more. The crowd gasped. Caleb looked as shocked as everyone else. Martha wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, her hands twisted in her apron. Why? Evelyn asked, genuinely baffled. Because John made me see sense. Martha's voice was barely audible. Made me see what a spiteful, bitter woman I've become. Made me see that you nearly dying because of my meddling would have been on my conscience forever. She finally looked up, tears streaming down her weathered face. I'm sorry. I was wrong. And I'll make it right if it's the last thing I do. Thaddeus looked between Martha and the assembled townspeople, his expression calculating. Whatever legal strategy he'd been planning clearly required Martha's cooperation as a witness. Without it, he had nothing but a father's wounded pride. Fine, he said finally, his voice tight. Keep her. But when she realizes what a mistake she's made, when this fantasy falls apart, don't come crawling back to Philadelphia expecting forgiveness. He climbed into the carriage and it pulled away, leaving dust and stunned silence in its wake. Evelyn realized she was shaking. Caleb's hands came to rest on her shoulders, steadying her. It's over, he said softly. He's gone. He'll try something else. He always does. Then we'll handle it when it comes. Together. He moved to face her, kneeling so their eyes were level. But right now we've got a preacher waiting and a marriage license burning a hole in my pocket. So what do you say we actually get married before anything else can interrupt? Despite everything, Evelyn laughed, slightly hysterical but real. Yes. God, yes. Let's do this before the world ends or locusts descend or something equally biblical. The wedding was nothing like the elaborate affairs Evelyn had attended in Philadelphia. There was no white dress, no flowers, no music beyond what Reverend Walsh's wife could coax from the church's battered organ. The pews held Sarah and Samuel in the front row, with a scattered handful of curious townspeople filling in behind. But as Evelyn sat in her wheelchair before the altar, with Caleb standing beside her and the children's eager faces watching, she felt something she'd never experienced at those fancy Philadelphia weddings. She felt like she belonged. Walsh kept the ceremony simple. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. His voice was warm, genuine. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, advisedly, and in the sight of God. Caleb had to clear his throat twice before he could speak his vows. I, Caleb Boone, take you, Evelyn Dorset, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. When it was Evelyn's turn, she spoke clearly, wanting no doubt about her choice. I, Evelyn Dorset, take you, Caleb Boone, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. The ring Caleb produced was simple, just a thin gold band that had belonged to his mother. His hand shook slightly as he slid it onto her finger. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, Walsh intoned, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. Caleb hesitated, suddenly looking uncertain. They'd shared one brief kiss on the porch that night, but this was different. This was a promise being sealed in front of witnesses. I won't break, Evelyn whispered, and saw a smile tug at his mouth. He leaned down and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded, her hands coming up to fist in his vest. Someone in the pews whistled. Sarah giggled, and when they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Samuel was grinning. Can we go home now? He asked. I'm hungry. The ride back to the ranch was markedly different from the morning's tense journey. Sarah sang at the top of her lungs, making up lyrics about weddings and dragons and cowboys. Samuel actually smiled, a real one that reached his eyes, and Caleb kept glancing at Evelyn like he couldn't quite believe she was real. You're staring, she said after the 5th time their eyes met. Can't help it. You're my wife now. I'm allowed to stare at my wife. That's a rather possessive way of looking at things. I'm a possessive man when it comes to things that matter. But his tone was teasing, gentle. Get used to it, Mrs. Boone. Mrs. Boone. The name settled over her like a blanket, warm and secure. She'd been Miss Dorset, then falsely Miss Emerson, then back to Miss Dorset. But now she was Mrs. Boone, with all the weight and wonder that title carried. The ranch appeared over the final rise, and Evelyn felt something in her chest expand. This was home now. Not a temporary stopping point, not a trial arrangement, but actually home. That evening, after a celebratory dinner where Evelyn made her best roast chicken and Sarah insisted on using Catherine's good china, the children were sent to bed early despite their protests. Caleb banked the fire while Evelyn cleared the dishes, working in comfortable silence. I should explain, Caleb said finally, about the sleeping arrangements. Evelyn's hand stilled on the plate she was drying. Oh? I don't expect, that is, I'm not assuming. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. What I'm trying to say is, I know this marriage started as a practical arrangement, and I know things happen fast. So if you need time, if you want to keep your own room for a while, I understand. The offer was sweet, considerate, and completely unnecessary. Evelyn set down the plate and wheeled closer to where he stood by the fire. Caleb Boone, she said, watching firelight play across his face. Are you trying to tell me you're nervous about your wedding night? His ears went red. I'm not nervous. I'm being respectful. That's very noble of you. She reached out, taking his hand. But I didn't marry you for a business arrangement. I married you because I love you, even though I've only known you 3 weeks. Even though it's probably insane to fall in love this fast. Even though a smart woman would have been more cautious. You love me? His voice had gone rough. Yes, you stubborn man. I love you. I love how you kneel so we're eye level. I love how you built me a stool without me asking. I love how you defended me against my father and half the town. I love how you talk about your first wife without shame or secrecy. I love... He kissed her, cutting off the litany, and this kiss was different from the one in church. This was heat and promise and barely restrained need. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. I love you too, he said against her lips. Been fighting it for weeks, telling myself it was too soon, too fast. But I do. I love you, Evelyn Boone. The sound of her new name in his voice sent warmth flooding through her. Then stop being noble and carry me upstairs. His eyes darkened. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. What happened next was private, sacred, theirs alone. But later, lying in Caleb's bed with her head on his chest and his arms around her, Evelyn felt peace settle over her like she'd finally come home after a lifetime of wandering. Tell me something, Caleb said softly, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. That story you told the kids, about the knight who lost his arm. How does it end? I haven't decided yet, Evelyn admitted. I've been making it up as I go. Well, I think he should win.
Think he should find happiness despite everything the world threw at him. Think he should realize that losing one thing doesn't mean losing everything.
That sounds like a good ending, Evelyn agreed. Though the best stories never really end, do they? They just keep going, finding new adventures. Like us? Like us. They fell silent, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, wind in the eaves, an owl calling somewhere distant, the creak of the house settling. Ordinary sounds that meant home, safety, belonging. Your father might still cause trouble, Caleb said eventually. Might contest the marriage or try legal maneuvering. Let him try. I'm not the helpless girl I was when I left Philadelphia. I have you now. I have Sarah and Samuel. I have a community that stood up for me today. She pressed closer. I'm not afraid anymore. Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have reason to be afraid again.
It was a promise he couldn't possibly guarantee. The world was too unpredictable, too harsh. But lying there in his arms, Evelyn chose to believe it anyway. Chose to believe that love and stubbornness could overcome anything, even federal judges and small-minded gossips. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that felt like breathing. Evelyn truly became mistress of the ranch house, organizing and improving with Sarah as her eager apprentice. She taught both children their letters properly, drilled them in arithmetic and geography and history. She kept the books for Caleb's ranch accounts, catching errors that had been costing him money for years. And slowly, quietly, she and Caleb built a marriage that was real in every sense, learning each other's rhythms, fighting occasionally but always making up, finding ways to laugh even when things were hard. Martha McCready, true to her word, had written a formal retraction of her earlier accusations and sent it to Judge Dorset with copies to the territorial governor. Whether it would prevent Thaddeus from trying further legal action remained to be seen, but at least Martha had tried to make amends. I still don't like her, Sarah declared one afternoon while helping Evelyn shell peas. But Papa says forgiveness is important even when it's hard. Your Papa is very wise, Evelyn agreed. And forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means not letting someone else's mistakes poison your own heart. Is that from one of your fancy books? No, that's from hard experience. Evelyn smiled at the girl. Sometimes the best lessons don't come from books at all. 2 months after the wedding, a letter arrived bearing Thaddeus Dorset's official seal. Evelyn's hands shook as she opened it, expecting threats or legal documents. Instead, she found something unexpected. The letter was brief, written in her father's precise legal hand. He would not contest the marriage. He would not pursue any claims of incompetency. He was, in his words, washing his hands of the entire matter. Her inheritance would go to distant cousins. Her name would be removed from family documents. As far as the Dorset family was concerned, Evelyn no longer existed. She should have felt devastated. Instead, she felt free. He's disowned me, she told Caleb that evening, handing him the letter. His jaw tightened as he read. I'm sorry. Don't be. He just gave me exactly what I wanted. Complete freedom to live my life without his interference. She took the letter back and fed it to the kitchen fire, watching the expensive paper curl and blacken. I'm not his daughter anymore. I'm just Evelyn Boone, wife and mother and woman who happens to use a wheelchair. Just? Caleb pulled her close. Evelyn, you're the farthest thing from just anything. That night, lying in their bed, Evelyn found herself thinking about how far she'd come. From the helpless girl trapped in her father's house, to the desperate woman using a dead sister's name, to this, a woman with a family who loved her, a purpose that mattered, a life that was truly hers. The next morning dawned clear and perfect. One of those Montana days where the sky stretched endlessly blue and the air tasted of sage and possibility. Caleb came to breakfast with an unusual gleam in his eye. "I have something to show you," he said mysteriously. "All of you, get your coats." The children pestered him with questions during the walk to the barn, but he refused to explain. Inside, in the space where he usually kept tools and tack, stood something covered by a tarp. With ceremony, Caleb pulled the tarp away. Underneath was a modified buggy, lightweight, elegant, with a special seat mounted lower than normal and a ramp that could fold down from the back. The woodwork was beautiful, clearly the product of hours of careful crafting. "I've been working on it at night," Caleb explained as Evelyn sat speechless. "Thought you might like to be able to drive yourself sometimes, not always dependent on me or the kids to get around. The seat's reinforced, the controls modified. You can operate everything with just your hands." Evelyn couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She wheeled closer, running her hands over the smooth wood. "You made this? For me? Seemed only fair. You've given us so much. Figured I should give something back." He helped her transfer from the wheelchair to the buggy seat, and she found it fitted her perfectly, every detail considered and planned. "Want to try it out?" With Sarah and Samuel cheering, with Caleb walking alongside offering advice and encouragement, Evelyn guided the buggy out of the barn and into the yard. It was strange at first, learning the feel of the reins and the brake lever, but within minutes she was moving confidently. "Mama, you're driving!" Sarah's voice was pure joy. "I'm driving," Evelyn echoed, wonder in her voice, and then louder, "I'm actually driving!" She made a full circuit of the property, faster each time, laughing like she hadn't laughed in years. The wind in her face, the sun on her shoulders, the absolute freedom of moving under her own power, it was intoxicating. When she finally pulled to a stop, Caleb was there to help her down, and she threw her arms around his neck. "Thank you. Thank you for seeing what I needed before I even knew I needed it. That's what family does," he said simply. "We see each other. We help each other. We show up." That afternoon, as Evelyn sat on the porch watching her children, because they were hers now, fully and completely, play with the barn cats, she found herself thinking about the story she'd been telling them. The knight who'd lost his arm and had to learn to fight differently. The children who learned that strength came in many forms. She knew how it ended now. It ended with the knight realizing he'd been looking at things wrong. That losing his sword arm hadn't made him less of a knight. It had made him a different kind of knight. The kind who understood that protection came in forms beyond fighting, that love was its own kind of courage, that family wasn't built on perfection, but on showing up day after day and choosing each other. It ended with the knight finding a kingdom worth defending, not through force of arms, but through stubborn devotion and the quiet heroism of daily care. It ended with the knight looking at his reflection and seeing not what he'd lost, but everything he'd found. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Endings," Evelyn said, "and new beginnings, and how they're really the same thing." He reached over, taking her hand. His palm was calloused from work, warm from the sun, strong from years of hard living. It was the hand of a man who'd survived war and loss and loneliness to find love on the other side. It was the hand she planned to hold for the rest of her life. "Tell me a story," Sarah demanded, appearing suddenly with Samuel trailing behind. "Tell us the one about the knight." So Evelyn did. She told them how the one-armed knight found his happy ending, not in glory or treasure or defeating dragons, but in the daily work of loving imperfect people in an imperfect world. She told them how the knight learned that losing something precious didn't mean losing everything. She told them how the knight discovered that the greatest adventures weren't always the ones involving swords and quests, but the ones that involved building a life worth living with people worth loving. And as she spoke, with her husband beside her and her children at her feet and the Montana sky stretching overhead, Evelyn Boone, who'd arrived on a train platform in a wheelchair expecting rejection, finally understood the truth her mother had tried to teach her all those years ago. Strength wasn't about what you could do standing. It was about what you chose to do regardless. Love wasn't about being perfect for someone. It was about being real with them. And home wasn't a place you could walk to. It was the people who met you where you were and chose to stay. Years later, when Sarah and Samuel had children of their own, They would tell the story of how their father married a woman in a wheelchair and the whole town thought he was crazy. They'd tell how their stepmother had thrown an ink bottle at a rattlesnake and saved a life. They'd tell how she'd faced down a federal judge and won her freedom. They'd tell how she'd driven a specially built buggy around the ranch like she was racing the wind itself. But most of all, they'd tell how she'd shown them that broken things could still be beautiful, that adaptation was its own kind of strength, that love didn't need legs to stand on, it just needed courage to begin and stubbornness to endure. And they'd end the story the way all the best stories end, not with happily ever after, because life was never that simple, but with happily enough. With choosing each other every day, with showing up, with building something real in a world that was often harsh but occasionally miraculously kind, with love that didn't walk away because it had never needed to walk in the first place. It just needed to stay, to carry, to be carried, to endure. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.